I want you to picture triangularity in your mind. Got it? Now, if you pictured a triangle, you're wrong. If this specific thing were what it meant to be a triangle, then this thing couldn't be a triangle because it's not identical to the first. Triangularity is just being a two-dimensional object with three sides of no particular length. But wait a second, there can't be just a two-dimensional object with three sides of no particular length. Any two-dimensional object with any sides will have some particular length. So how can there be such a thing as triangularity? Let's consider. Hello philosophers, I'm Chico. Welcome to the Philosopher Show, where we consider the greatest questions of human history. Great minds come up with great ideas, but true philosophers put those great ideas to the test. That's what happens in Plato's dialogue, the Parmenides. Plato subjects his greatest idea, the doctrine of the forms, to his harshest criticism. It all begins with a young Socrates, who, remember from the last few videos, is probably a character Plato is using to give his own theories, listening to a philosopher named Zeno. And Zeno's giving the problem of compresence of opposites that you've learned from the last few videos. And he's doing it in a specific way. For you old guys, you may remember when Vanilla Ice got busted for copying David Bowie's Under Pressure. And if you go back and listen to the interviews on Vanilla Ice, it sounds ridiculous. He admits that Ice Ice Baby is like Under Pressure, and then he says, no, it's not like Under Pressure. Well, which is it? That's a contradiction, man. It's either like the song or it isn't like the song. But then again, everything that we see is like and unlike. Vanilla Ice was like MC Hammer, but unlike Tupac. So he was both like and unlike. But that's a contradiction. Luckily, Socrates has a response: the forms. It's a contradiction only if like is also unlike. So if Vanilla Ice is like, he can't be unlike. But what if likeness is something different than Vanilla Ice, and Vanilla Ice just partakes in likeness? This is the idea of the forms. There is such a thing as likeness itself. It's real, it's a different thing than the particulars that have it, such as Vanilla Ice, and those particular things have the property of likeness by participating in this form of likeness. Now, particulars can participate in opposite forms, but it's not like they themselves are opposites. So we have a solution. Particulars are mixes of opposites, but they aren't themselves the opposites. They're just partaking in different forms. Those forms are purely what they are. The form of likeness is just pure likeness itself. Now, in the dialogue, this is where Parmenides steps in and goes off on Socrates in a friendly way. He presents a bunch of challenges to the forms. And it's interesting because Plato's writing this, so there's a reason he has Parmenides bringing up these objections to Socrates. To my mind, and to the mind of a lot of Plato scholars, he's giving these objections not because he wants to throw out the doctrine of the forms, but because he wants to hone it, he wants to perfect it. For our purposes, it won't really matter. All I'm interested in is how viable this idea is as an explanation of universals. Now, the first problem that Parmenides gives is that there are going to be some weird forms. Here are some forms that Socrates is comfortable with: likeness, multiplicity, oneness, justice, beautiful, good. But then Parmenides presents some that Socrates finds objectionable. The first kinds, he says, he's not sure if these work the same way as those ones that we just saw: human, fire, water. And the second kind, Parmenides says, are undignified and worthless: hair, mud, and dirt. And Socrates agrees, yeah, those things can't have forms. And when you first read this dialogue, that sounds weird. What, is dirt just like icky or something? Growth, hair. So the question is, why does Socrates consider these problems? Now, there are a number of different possibilities here. I'm going to present to you what I think is the most plausible reason why Socrates finds these objectionable. Now remember, Zeno's dilemma here is that things being like and unlike is a contradiction. Socrates' solution is, wait, things are not like and unlike. They participate in likeness. But likeness itself is just pure likeness. The form itself doesn't have this mixture of opposites. It is purely what it is. So key to this argument is that forms just are what they are, purely and simply, no admixture of opposites. Now, this idea that forms are what they cause in the particulars is called self-predication. Each form is what it is, and to the purest degree. Particulars only partake in those forms. So the form of good is itself pure goodness. And things like Nutella are only good because they partake in that goodness. The form of the just is itself pure justice. And Superman is only just because he participates in the form of justice. Now this makes sense when we're talking about stuff like likeness, justice, goodness. But what about stuff like humans? Assume I am a human because I partake in the form of human. And also assume self-predication. The form of human is itself human and purely human? What does that look like? All humans are some height, but they're not the same height. All humans are some color, but they're not the same color. So what would pure human be? It would have to be something that's colored without being a specific color, and with a height but not a specific height. And how can a thing be like that? Or like I said in the hook for this video, the form of triangularity. It would be pure triangularity without being a triangle? In other words, when we take self-predication seriously, it seems like a problem for physical things. Forms are non-physical. After all, your humanness isn't like some physical part in you that you could take out and, I'm not a human anymore, put back in, oh, thank goodness I'm a human. So it seems strange how there can be pure forms of things that are necessarily physical. So here's our first challenge. What should we do about self-predication of the forms? Should we keep self-predication of all the forms? Well, then we're going to have to answer the question, in what way do the forms of physical things self-predicate? In what way are there pure forms of physical things? Do we want to keep self-predication solely for forms of non-physical things, but reject self-predication for the forms of physical things? Well, that seems like special pleading. And if you're not sure what that is, I'm going to do a video on that and you can check it out. Do we want to keep self-predication for the forms of non-physical things and just throw out all forms of physical things, which seems to be the way that Socrates is leaning in this dialogue? The problem now is, how do we explain attribute agreement of physical things? Plato uses the doctrine of forms to explain how two different things can share the same attributes. So Nutella can be different than coffee, but both can share the attribute good. And we explain that because they both partake in the form of goodness. But how can Carlos and Anita be two different things and both share the attribute human? Or we have two different shapes and they both share the attribute triangle. If we can't explain these kinds of attribute agreements, we're either going to have to find some other explanation for this kind of attribute agreement, or the project's going to fail. Or do we just want to reject self-predication altogether? Interestingly, this is a path that a lot of Plato followers of modern times have taken. They keep the doctrine of the forms, but they reject the idea that, for example, the form of likeness has to itself be pure likeness. And personally, I kind of like that, because I'm not sure what pure likeness could be if it's not like some other thing. The problem with this tack, now it becomes mysterious how forms explain those properties that things have. Remember, self-predication was instrumental in explaining how vanilla ice could participate in opposite forms. Think about the Nutella example. What makes Nutella good? Well, it partakes in the pure goodness. But if the form of good isn't itself good, in what way does it cause goodness in Nutella? Now, don't get me wrong, this doesn't make this option unviable. We've still posited a cause that explains properties. We just don't explain really how it does what it does. And that's not necessarily bad, but notice, this is the same objection that Socrates leveled at natural science before. In that video, I related how Socrates said natural science isn't really explaining anything, it's just redescribing what actually happens. Well, if we get rid of self-predication, that's exactly what's happening here. We're describing the fact that the forms cause the properties in particular things, but we can't really explain how. So challenge number one, what about self-predication? Please let me know in the comments if you have any questions about self-predication or about this objection. And I'll be going over Parmenides' other objections in future videos. But that's all I got for today. See you next time. Adios.